Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Moving deeper now into this extraordinary, challenging, rewarding, bittersweet time, the fasting month. We will continue, inshallah, with our exercise in illuminating and edifying ourselves with our chosen topic, which this year is going to focus on the women of the Tabi'in, the Tabi'iyat. And as we were mentioning last time, all too often we pass hastily over those names listed in the isnads without really getting a kind of three-dimensional, full-blooded sense of what those extraordinary people were like. And for all of the contemporary discussion among Muslims and non-Muslims about gender in Islam, one of the best ways of getting a sense of what Islam actually did with and for and through women is to see how they were in the earliest generations, to see their extraordinary dedication, the sacrifices that they made, in addition to the usual sacrifices that women make through being wives and mothers. And last time we were looking at Fatima Nabawiyya, mother of the poor, mother of the orphans, and her the great traumas that she passed through, and her resolute love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the face of so many difficulties. And this week I'd like to turn to another figure who is possibly a little better known. And this is somebody called Naila bint al-Farafisa. Naila is still a common name amongst Muslim girls in most Muslim cultures, and people don't always know who it is that they're naming their daughters after. And of course it's one of the formidable women of early Islam. Her story is unusual amongst the Sahaba in that most of them are converts from the old Arabian religion, whereas she comes from a Christian background. She's from the tribe of Kalb, which at that time was an entirely Christian tribe that followed a Monophysite form of Christianity. The buffer zone between the Byzantine Empire and pagan Arabia had always been these tribes like Banu Lachem and Banu Ghassan, and the Kalb are part of that world. And she has a brother with the unlikely name of Dab, which means a lizard. Okay, so her brother's called the Lizard. And he is interested in Islam and says, you must come to Medina. That's the city of the Deen. By this time, the Holy Prophet ﷺ has moved on, but she goes to Medina, and she's converted to Islam by Aisha bint Abi Bakr radiallahu anha. We have to imagine that the community in Medina was constantly being enriched by people nowadays, I guess we'd call refugees, asylum seekers, spiritual seekers. People have heard that there's this light of prophecy that's already changing the world and producing breathtakingly beautiful people, and want to go to Medina from the remote deserts, in the case of these Christian Arabs, to check it out. So Aisha radiallahu anha talks to her about Islam and about Tawheed, and explains the basic duties of Islam and the way in which we draw closer to our one Creator. She takes her Shahada with Aisha. Must have been a very beautiful moment. It's often quite helpful spiritually to try and imagine what it might have been like in that very primordial city. It wasn't like a Roman city with a forum and stone temples and so forth. Medina was extraordinarily primordial and basic, buildings just of adobe, mud brick, everything very close to nature. Silent city as well, apart from the occasional donkey, and the spiritual hub being the Masjid al-Nabawi. So she converts, and as we'll see, takes her new religion very seriously. And she marries. And who does she marry? She marries Uthman bin Affan, the Khalifa, We don't know exactly how that happened, how the introduction worked. It was probably through Aisha. But she marries Uthman and they become a kind of power couple. And they have a number of children. And actually the daughters are better known to the hadith scholars and to historians. We can't go into the details now, but there's Maryam as-Sughra, Maryam the Less, to distinguish her from another Maryam. There is Arwa bint Uthman, there's Khalid. These are kind of formidable girls and women that are born of this union. She seems to have been a wise woman because the historians mention that the Khalifa himself often asked for her advice. She's a kind of power behind the throne. Can't have been much of a throne, but she was there in any case. And this is also, the Holy Prophet ﷺ used to ask his wives for advice. This is part of the Sunnah, and there's a lot of wisdom in wives and spouses. And she continues to be very close to Aisha, and the historians seem to suggest that this was some kind of spiritual mentorship. Aisha was, if you like, her sheikha. And there's other cases where Aisha, who of course was very young when the Holy Prophet dies, is using her retirement as a widow in order not just to narrate thousands of hadiths and to teach in the mosque, but also to provide spiritual initiation, particularly to these women. And she saw in Naila somebody of very considerable intelligent and spiritual capacity. So we find in the hadith collections that there are some hadiths in which Aisha is transmitting a hadith to Naila bint al-Farafisa. That's a well-known phenomenon in the world of isnad. So this is a sheikha teaching another sheikha, and it's a female line in the isnads. Of course, Uthman has a tragic end. And of all the people in his household, all of his supporters, she is the closest to him at the end. And because this is kind of global politics now, we have quite a lot of information about what that was like and what she was doing. The story is the depressing and familiar one, that there are rioters and rebels in this very tumultuous, turbulent new world that Islam has suddenly created. The Middle East is united to Arabia for the first time ever. Persia, it's an extraordinarily disorienting time for many people. There are people with political grievances and grumbles, and obviously we can't go into that assessment at this point. But matters have come to a head, and these rebels have surrounded Uthman's house in Medina for, historians say, 49 days. He can't come or go. And they're outside the adobe walls of his kind of compound. It would have been just a courtyard and a couple of rooms without windows. They were living very simply. Not our idea of a kind of Arabian Nights caliph at all, with marble palace guarded by lions, and it's not that world. It must have been extremely simple. But surrounded by these guys. And she is with him. And she tries to protect him. She basically becomes the bodyguard, people of Medina, and she gets very angry about this, kind of afraid, paralyzed, not sure what to do, although their hearts are with Uthman. But this thing has suddenly happened, and Muslims are fighting other Muslims, and they don't know what to do. They climb over the wall. And what does she do? And the historians mentioned this. She has to get them out. So, kashafat an sha'riha. She gets out her hair, which is super shocking in this time and in that place. They're kind of taken aback. Uthman doesn't like this. So he says, khudi himaraki, put your veil back on. فإن حرمة شعرك أعظم عندي من دخولهم علي. Because the appearance of your hair is more concerning to me than their breaking into my house. That's how zealous they were for the honor of the women. And then these ruffians attack Uthman, and she tries to defend him. She's not running off screaming, but she's doing what she can. تلقت عنه ضربات السيوف. They're getting out their swords, and she grabs one of the swords with her left hand. Historians record this pretty precisely. And the sword cuts off her fingertips. She doesn't let go. And the man drives the sword into the Khalifa, and she chucks herself on her husband's body in order to protect him. But it's not a go, and they stab in this horrendous event until the Khalifa is dead and she's holding his lifeless body with her fingers bleeding. Some accounts say both hands were affected. She was grabbing the swords with her bare hands. And the Khalifa's lifeless body, he dies in her lap. She's holding his head. And they grab her hands, and why are you doing this? She says, we want to slap his face. She doesn't let them do that. They physically grab her. This is the kind of people that they are. And she's crying, Inna Amir al-Mu'minina qad qutil. The commander of the faithful, the Khalifa, the head of the Muslims, has been killed, assassinated. And then they loot the house. They steal whatever is valuable or of interest to them, and they clear off. The city is in a state of terror. There's no law, no police, nothing. It's open season for anybody, any thief, any rapist. It's a time that's anarchic. What is she going to do? Uthman's body is in the house. Outside it's dangerous. People aren't really coming to help too much, except a few. And Uthman's body remains in the room for 3 days, and she's praying, reading Quran, trying to work out what to do. On the evening of the third day, Bain al-Maghribi wal-Isha, between the sunset and the night prayer, when it gets dark, they go out, and she goes out with them, with some of the loyal great companions like Zayd bin Thabit, of course, the famous scribe of the chosen one, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Of course, his Sahaba are there. And she goes out of the house first, carrying a lantern, and the others are carrying the body behind her and going to Baqi', the cemetery. And it's so risky that actually she puts the lantern out, and they go in darkness, led by this lady. And that's why, if you know al-Baqi', you can see there's some distance actually between the grave of the Prophet Abu Bakr, Omar, and where Uthman is buried, because they had to bury him while nobody was noticing in this more remote area. The janazah prayer was led quietly by Jubair bin Mut'im, a very famous Sahabi, and the third Khalifa is the martyr, Shaheed, is laid quietly to rest. And there's a famous poem that she recites at that time. وَمَا لِي لَا أَبْكِي وَأُبْكِي قَرَابَتِي وَقَدْ ذَهَبَتْ عَنَّا فُضُولُ أَبِي عَمْرِ, and so forth. She says, why should I not weep? Why should I not make my relations weep when the best of his family has been taken away from me? And then it seems, perhaps this is the next day, she gives a talk, a khutbah, public declaration, which the historians have recorded. خطبت نائلة رضي الله عنها في المسلمين. Naila is speaking, preaching to the Muslims. فقالت, معاشر المؤمنين وأهل الله لا تستكثروا مقامي ولا تستكثروا كلامي. O assembly of the believers and the people of Allah, do not consider my standing here to be too much. Do not consider my words to be too much. فإني حزينة أصبت بعظيم. I am grief-stricken. I have been afflicted by something terrible. وتذوقت ثقلا من عثمان بن عفان. And I have become the widow, the bereaved one of Uthman bin Affan. ثالث الأركان من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. The third of the pillars amongst the companions of Allah's Messenger. فقد تراجع الناس في الشورى حين تقدم فلم يتقدم هو متقدم ولم يشك في فضله متأثم. Quite learned, elegant Arabic. And she's talking about the merit of Uthman. So she says, when the gathering of the Shura came together to consider who should be the new Khalifa, this was when he was appointed, people were hesitant, but he was set forth. And nobody there doubted his merit. And another thing that's preserved of her, so we can actually hear her own words, so you can see what a kind of heroic, tough woman she was, is that she sent a message to Muawiyah. She had sent a message to Muawiyah, written a letter. Muawiyah at the time, of course, not yet Khalifa, but the governor of Syria. And after Uthman died, she sent a copy of this letter to Muawiyah. بكتاب مرفق معه قميص عثمان ممزقا مليئا بالدماء. So she sent a letter along with Uthman's shirt that was stained with his blood. وعقدت في زر القميص خصلة من شعرة لحيته, and included some hairs from his beard. وأوصت إليه أن يعلق كل أولئك في المسجد الجامع في دمشق. And she told him to hang this shirt up in the great mosque in Damascus. وأن يقرأ على المجتمعين ذلك الكتاب, and to read to everybody present this letter that she had sent about the merit of Uthman. وكان بعض ما جاء فيه, and some of the contents of this letter were إلى معاوية ibn Abi Sufyan, to Muawiyah, son of Abu Sufyan, to أما بعد, to follow, to proceed. فإني أدعوكم إلى الله الذي أنعم عليكم وعلمكم الإسلام. I call you to Allah, who has blessed you and has taught you Islam, وهداكم من الضلالة, and guided you out of misguidance, وأنقذكم من الكفر, and saved you from misbelief, ونصركم على العدو, and gave you victory, وأسبغ عليكم نعمه ظاهرة وباطنة, and poured his outward and inward blessings upon you. وأنشدكم الله وأذكركم حقه, and I abjure you by God, and I remind you of his rights. وحق خليفته, and the right of his Khalifa. أن تنصروه بعزم الله عليكم, that you should give him support. And of course, he hadn't supported him. This was her perception. And then some verses from the Quran. So because of respect for the widow of the Khalifa, Muawiyah doesn't have much choice. He puts it up on the wall of the mosque in Damascus, along with this bit of beard. And historians say that 50,000 of the people of Damascus went there to read this letter, and they wept. Again, we seem here to be dealing with a woman who really, really, really loved her husband, because she can't bring herself to marry again. As far as we can tell from the history, she doesn't marry again. Muawiyah, who's never short of initiative, proposes to her. And he has made inquiries. What's the most beautiful thing about her? Okay, and everybody says, you know, her teeth are really beautiful. She hears about this, and again, according to the historians, when she receives the proposal from Muawiyah, she physically pulls out one of her teeth, and she sends it off to him, saying, "Is it this that you want?" So then he kind of gives up. She doesn't marry again. So, and again, she's involved in narrating these hadiths. She's still close to Aisha. She's part of that female world of scholarship and devotion and piety and Quran reading. And yeah, and particularly in the fasting month, we know that Uthman radiallahu anhu was killed while he was fasting. We have to remember that despite the sacrifices that we make, and the sacrifices that women in particular make in Ramadan, because, well, the husband is sleeping upstairs, the wife is probably doing a lot of stuff in the kitchen, getting ready for iftar and getting ready for guests. Women do a lot in Ramadan. There are some wives who have really made sacrifices and have really expressed love and faithfulness to their husbands. And you get a sense from this, I think, of the quality of Uthman. She wouldn't have loved him so much and not really been contented with any man after he died, unless it'd been really something extraordinary, and she knew him, I guess, better than anybody. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we fast to help us not to complain too much and to remember that others have been through tribulations unimaginably harder than ours. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shall resurrect Uthman, all of the four Khulafa and all of their noble wives, and all of those who narrated hadiths from their noble wives and received saintly initiations and spiritual gifts from their noble wives, should resurrect them with the intercession of the Chosen One, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, bring them all to al-Hawd al-Mawrud, and inshallah give us the blessing of being in their company, inshallah. So may Allah accept their fasting and accept our fasting, and inshallah make this a blessed Ramadan. Taqabbalallahu siyamakum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Ramadan provides us with an invaluable opportunity to increase our piety, our God consciousness. It is also an opportune time to give generously in charity. As an independent institution of higher education and a registered charity, our work relies on the generosity of individuals like you. During this blessed month, we ask you to support Cambridge Muslim College. You can do so through regular giving, by becoming a friend or patron, or one-off donations, whatever the amount. This Ramadan, our goal is to make 10,000 new friends. Head to the donate page on our website, become a friend for as little as £5 a month, and help us continue delivering educational programs like this for the wider community, training the next generation of Muslim scholars, thinkers, and leaders.